Most people don't lose their power in one dramatic moment. They lose it quietly. One comment, one rejection, one text message that never arrives, and suddenly a stranger has control over their mood. Think about that. Someone you've never met, someone who doesn't pay your bills, someone who won't even remember your name a year from now, can completely change how you feel. That's not confidence. That's emotional dependence. Put your headphones on, because these truths work quietly. This isn't just about a book. It's about the hidden patterns controlling your mind. You're listening to Listen Beyond. Have you ever noticed something strange? The people who seem the strongest are rarely the loudest. They don't rush to defend themselves. They don't argue with everyone. They don't explain every decision. And somehow, the less they react, the more powerful they appear. For most of our lives, we've been taught the opposite. Speak up, defend yourself, fight back, prove them wrong. But what if constantly reacting is the very thing that's making you weak? What if every emotional reaction is quietly handing away a piece of your freedom? Because here's the uncomfortable truth most people overlook. Your mind would rather protect your ego than protect your future. Someone criticizes you, your ego wants revenge. Someone rejects you, your ego wants validation. Someone misunderstands you, your ego wants to explain. And before you know it, your entire life becomes a series of emotional reactions, one after another, like a puppet whose strings are being pulled by everyone around them. When you sit alone with this thought, you realize something disturbing. Most people aren't living intentionally, they're reacting habitually. A notification appears, reaction. A negative comment appears, reaction. Bad news arrives, reaction. The market crashes, reaction. A relationship ends, reaction. Years pass, still reacting. Still allowing external events to dictate internal peace. And this is where most people destroy themselves, not through failure, not through lack of talent, but through emotional leakage. Tiny reactions, tiny emotional losses, repeated thousands of times, until they no longer know who they are without the chaos. Have you ever wondered why some people remain calm during situations that break everyone else? It isn't because they feel less. It isn't because life is easier for them. It's because, somewhere along the way, they learned a secret. Not everything deserves access to your nervous system. Read that again in your mind. Not everything deserves access to your nervous system. The modern world profits from your reaction. Social media profits from it. News channels profit from it. Algorithms profit from it. Outrage keeps people engaged. Calmness sets people free. And freedom is dangerous, because a person who cannot be emotionally manipulated becomes impossible to control. Think about the last time someone upset you. What actually happened? Was it their words? Or was it the meaning your mind attached to those words? Because the real problem was never on the surface. The real problem was the unconscious belief that every event requires an emotional response. But it doesn't. A storm doesn't ask permission before it passes, and neither should your peace. In my own reflection on this pattern, I've noticed something fascinating. The moments I regret most are rarely the moments when I stayed silent. They're the moments when emotions spoke before wisdom arrived. A text sent too quickly, an argument that lasted too long, a decision made while angry. Most people never realize this until it's too late. Every reaction has a cost. Sometimes the cost is a relationship. Sometimes it's an opportunity. Sometimes it's years of inner peace. And the dangerous part isn't what you think. The dangerous part is that reacting feels productive. It feels like action. It feels like control. But often it's neither. Sometimes the strongest move is no move. Sometimes silence is not weakness, it's discipline. Sometimes walking away isn't surrender, it's self-respect. And sometimes the most powerful response is none at all. Because true confidence isn't found in winning every battle. True confidence comes from knowing which battles are beneath you. Imagine waking up tomorrow. Same problems, same people, same challenges. But with one difference. Nothing has automatic access to your emotions anymore. Criticism arrives, you observe it. Pressure arrives, you breathe through it. Chaos arrives, you remain grounded. That version of you already exists. It's buried beneath years of conditioning, years of emotional habits. Years of believing that reacting means caring. But what if caring less about every little thing is exactly what allows you to care more about what truly matters? That's the question we'll carry forward, because what comes next is even deeper. Most people think confidence starts with action, but confidence actually begins in a place far less visible. Inside the battlefield of your own emotions. Most people think emotions are the problem. They're not. Anger isn't the problem. Fear isn't the problem. Anxiety isn't the problem. The real problem is what happens after they arrive. Because emotions are visitors, but most people turn them into permanent residents. Think about it. A stressful moment lasts 10 minutes, yet the anxiety survives for 10 days. A rejection lasts one conversation, yet the pain follows someone for years. An insult takes 5 seconds to speak, yet it echoes in the mind every night before sleep. Why? Because most people don't experience emotions, they become them. And that changes everything. Have you ever noticed how people introduce themselves through their struggles? I'm anxious. I'm depressed. I'm broken. I'm an overthinker. At first, it sounds harmless, but language quietly shapes identity. The moment you say, I am anxiety, instead of, I feel anxiety, your mind stops searching for solutions. It starts building a home. And this is where most people destroy themselves. Not because they feel negative emotions, but because they mistake temporary weather for permanent climate. When you sit alone with this thought, you realize something strange. No emotion has ever stayed forever. Not one. Fear leaves. Anger leaves. Sadness leaves. Even happiness leaves. Everything moves. Everything passes. Yet we spend our lives acting as if today's emotion will define tomorrow's future. That's why people quit dreams too early, end relationships too quickly, give up on themselves too soon. They're making permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. And the dangerous part isn't what you think. The dangerous part is that emotions feel true. Fear feels like reality. Anxiety feels like certainty. Doubt feels like wisdom. But feelings aren't facts. They are signals, nothing more. Imagine driving through thick fog. You can't see very far. Everything feels uncertain. But you don't assume the road disappeared. You simply understand your vision is limited. Emotions work the same way. Fear is emotional fog. Anxiety is emotional fog. Stress is emotional fog. The road is still there. You just can't see it clearly yet. But the real problem isn't that people experience emotional fog. The real problem is that they trust it. They let temporary emotions become life advisors. And those advisors are terrible at their job. Fear says, don't try. Growth requires trying. Anxiety says, stay safe. Greatness requires risk. Doubt says wait. Life rewards action. So people spend years listening to voices that were never designed to lead them, only to discover later that comfort quietly stole their potential. Think about modern life. Notifications never stop. Information never stops. Comparison never stops. For the first time in human history, millions of people are carrying emotional weight they were never designed to carry. Everyone else's success, everyone else's opinions, everyone else's highlight reels. The nervous system never gets a chance to breathe. And then people wonder why they feel exhausted. Because the mind wasn't built to process infinite stimulation. It was built to focus, to prioritize, to survive. What happens when you feed it chaos every hour of every day? Eventually, it becomes chaos. And here's the irony. Most people are trying to solve emotional problems through external solutions. More money, more attention, more achievements, more validation. But emotional mastery begins internally, not externally. Because a calm mind can handle pressure, but a chaotic mind struggles even with success. I've seen people achieve everything they thought they wanted, the career, the house, the recognition, and still feel empty. Because external success cannot organize internal chaos. Only awareness can do that. Only discipline can do that. Only emotional mastery can do that. As the old saying goes, he who conquers himself is the mightiest warrior. Not because life becomes easier, but because life loses its ability to control him. Imagine becoming the kind of person who notices fear without obeying it, who notices anxiety without becoming it, who notices anger without surrendering to it. That is real freedom. Not freedom from emotions, freedom from emotional slavery. And once you taste that freedom, everything changes. Your decisions improve, your relationships improves, your confidence improves, your future improves. Because confidence was never about feeling fearless. Confidence is the ability to keep moving while fear rides beside you. And what we're about to discover next is even more dangerous. Because beneath anxiety, beneath fear, beneath insecurity, there is another invisible prison most people never escape. The desperate need for approval. There is a prison most people never see. No walls, no chains, no locked doors. Yet millions spend their entire lives trapped inside it. The prison is called approval. And the strangest part, most people mistake it for love. They spend years trying to be liked, trying to fit in, trying not to disappoint anyone, trying to become a version of themselves that earns applause. But have you ever noticed what happens when your happiness depends on other people's approval? You become easy to control. The moment someone can give you value, they can also take it away. A compliment makes your day. A criticism ruins your week. A stranger's opinion changes your mood. A social media post determines your confidence. And without realizing it, your emotional life is being outsourced. Think about that. You've handed the steering wheel of your self-worth to people who aren't even driving in the same direction. And this is where most people destroy themselves. Not because they lack talent, not because they lack intelligence, but because they're terrified of being disliked. So they stay quiet when they should speak. They say yes when they mean no. They hide parts of themselves to avoid rejection. And slowly, they disappear. Not physically, psychologically. One compromise at a time. One mask at a time. One act at a time. Until they no longer recognize the person staring back from the mirror. When you sit alone with this thought, you realize something uncomfortable. Many people don't know who they really are. They only know who they've learned to become for others. different personality at work, different personality online, different personality around friends, different personality around family. Always adjusting, always performing, always seeking approval. And the dangerous part isn't what you think. The dangerous part is that society rewards this behavior. From childhood, we're trained to seek external validation. Good grades, good behavior, good reputation, good image. Everything becomes a performance. And eventually, people stop asking a very important question. What do I actually want? Because they've spent so much time asking, what will people think? Have you ever noticed how exhausting that is? Constantly monitoring yourself, constantly editing yourself, constantly wondering how you're being perceived. No wonder so many people feel anxious. They're living on stage, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But the real problem isn't judgment. The real problem is dependency. Because when your confidence depends on applause, silence feels like failure, and approval becomes a drug. You need more likes, more praise, more recognition, more attention. The dosage keeps increasing, but the satisfaction never lasts. Because external validation has a hidden flaw. It expires. Every compliment fades. Every achievement becomes normal. Every success eventually loses its emotional impact. So people keep chasing, keep proving, keep performing. And somehow, they're still unhappy. Why? Because self-worth was never supposed to be rented from the outside world. It was supposed to be built from within. In my own reflection on this pattern, I've noticed something fascinating. The most confident people aren't necessarily the most admired. They're simply the least dependent on admiration. That's a completely different thing. They don't need everyone to understand them. They don't need everyone to agree with them. They don't need permission to trust themselves. Imagine the freedom in that. Imagine making decisions based on values instead of popularity. Imagine choosing authenticity over approval. Imagine waking up one day and realizing you no longer need strangers to tell you who you are, because you already know. That's power. Not the loud kind, not the flashy kind, the quiet kind. The kind that cannot be taken away by criticism, or rejection, or misunderstanding. As the old saying goes, if you live for their acceptance, you'll die from their rejection. Most people hear that quote. Very few actually understand it, because understanding it requires letting go. Letting go of the need to impress, the need to explain, the need to prove, the need to win everyone over. And that's terrifying at first, because the ego survives through approval. But something incredible happens after that fear passes. You begin meeting the real version of yourself, not the edited version, not the performance, not the mask, the real one. And for the first time, you discover that self-respect feels far better than approval ever did. But we're not finished yet, because once you stop seeking validation, another challenge appears, one even more difficult. The ability to remain strong when life inevitably pushes back, because confidence means very little without resilience. And that's where our journey goes next, into the world of mental armor. Life has a way of revealing who you really are. Not when things are easy, not when everything is working, not when people are cheering for you. The truth comes out when pressure arrives, when plans fall apart, when trust gets broken, when nobody shows up, when the future becomes uncertain. That's when the mask falls off, and that's when you meet yourself. Most people think mental strength is something you're born with. It isn't. Mental strength is built. usually through experiences you never wanted. Think about it. Nobody asks for heartbreak. Nobody asks for betrayal. Nobody asks for failure. Yet those moments often become the greatest teachers, not because pain is magical, but because pain exposes weaknesses, comfort keeps hidden. Have you ever noticed this? When life feels good, everyone thinks they're strong. Everyone believes they're disciplined. Everyone believes they're confident. Then one unexpected setback arrives, and suddenly everything changes. The confidence disappears. The motivation disappears. The discipline disappears. Why? Because it wasn't strength. It was convenience. And this is where most people destroy themselves. They mistake comfort for capability. As long as circumstances are favorable, they feel powerful. But real power isn't tested during comfort. It's tested during resistance. When you sit alone with this thought, you realize something uncomfortable. The strongest people you know probably didn't become strong through success. They became strong through survival, through loss, through disappointment, through moments that forced them to adapt. That's why resilience has such a different energy. It's not loud, it's not flashy, it's quiet, calm, grounded. Because resilient people understand something most people never learn. Life doesn't stop being difficult. You simply become better at carrying difficult things. But the dangerous part isn't what you think. The dangerous part is how modern culture teaches people to avoid discomfort at all costs. Feel bored? Grab your phone. Feel lonely? Distract yourself. Feel anxious? Escape. Feel uncertain? Seek reassurance. Everything is designed to eliminate discomfort immediately. And because of that, many people never develop emotional endurance, the ability to sit with difficult feelings without running from them, the ability to remain steady when life becomes unpredictable, the ability to suffer temporarily without collapsing permanently. Think about a tree during a storm. The strongest trees aren't protected from the wind. They've simply endured enough storms to develop deeper roots. Humans are no different. Your roots are built through adversity, not comfort, not convenience, not ease. Adversity. The problem is that most people spend their lives asking the wrong question. They ask, why is this happening to me? But resilient people ask, what is this teaching me? That small shift changes everything. One mindset creates victims. The other creates growth. One creates bitterness. The other creates wisdom. Because the real problem was never on the surface. The real problem was believing that hardship meant something was wrong. What if hardship is part of the process? What if the obstacle isn't blocking the path? What if the obstacle is the path? Most people never realize this until it's too late. Every challenge contains hidden training. Every setback contains hidden information. Every painful experience contains hidden growth. But only if you're willing to look beyond the pain itself. In my own reflection on this pattern, I've noticed something powerful. The moments that felt like the end of everything often became the beginning of something better. Not immediately, not overnight, but eventually. Because suffering has a strange way of refining people. It removes illusions. It removes entitlement. It removes weakness. And if you survive it correctly, it leaves behind clarity, a stronger identity, a stronger mind, a stronger future. As the old saying goes, the same fire that melts wax hardens steel. The question is never whether life will test you. The question is what those tests will turn you into. Because pressure doesn't create character. Pressure reveals character. And what happens if you keep avoiding every difficult thing? You stay fragile. You stay dependent on perfect circumstances. You stay vulnerable to every storm. But if you learn to endure, if you learn to adapt, if you learn to remain calm when everything around you becomes chaotic, you become dangerous in a completely different way. Not dangerous to others, dangerous to limitation, dangerous to fear, dangerous to every obstacle that once controlled your life. And that's where confidence begins transforming into something much deeper. Because confidence without action is just an idea. The next step is learning how strong people actually move through the world, how confidence becomes visible, how power becomes behavior, how identity becomes action. And that's exactly where we're going next. Most people think confidence is something you feel. It isn't. Confidence is something you demonstrate, long before anyone notices it, long before you believe it yourself. Because confidence doesn't begin in your emotions, it begins in your behavior. Think about the people you've admired most, the truly confident ones, not the loud ones, not the attention seekers, not the people constantly announcing how successful they are. The real ones, the ones whose presence changes a room without saying a word. What makes them different? It's not talent, it's not luck, and surprisingly, it's not even confidence. It's certainty. A quiet certainty. The kind that doesn't need approval. The kind that doesn't need permission. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself every 5 minutes. Have you ever noticed how insecure people talk? They're constantly explaining, constantly defending, constantly convincing, as if every conversation is a courtroom trial. Every opinion needs evidence. Every decision needs justification. Every action needs validation. Why? Because uncertainty creates noise. Certainty creates silence. And this is where most people destroy themselves. They spend years trying to appear confident instead of becoming confident. There's a difference. One is performance, the other is identity. Performance requires maintenance. Identity becomes automatic. Think about someone learning to drive. At first, every movement feels conscious. Every turn, every decision, every adjustment. But eventually, it becomes natural. Confidence works the same way. At first, you practice it. Later, you become it. But the dangerous part isn't what you think. The dangerous part is that most people are waiting to feel confident before taking action. And that's backwards. They think, when I feel ready, I'll start. When I feel confident, I'll speak. When I believe in myself, I'll take the risk. But confidence has never worked that way. Confidence is created after action, not before it. The first speech creates confidence. The first business creates confidence. The first difficult conversation creates confidence. The first leap creates confidence. Action is the cause. Confidence is the effect. Yet millions spend years waiting for an emotion that only arrives through movement. When you sit alone with this thought, you realize something powerful. The life you've been waiting for may be waiting for you to move first. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, just move. Because fear and confidence often travel together. The strongest people in the world still feel fear. The difference is simple. Fear gets a vote, not a veto. Think about that. Fear gets a voice, but it doesn't get control. That's how confidence looks in real life. It isn't the absence of uncertainty. It's action despite uncertainty. And once you understand this, everything changes. You stop measuring yourself by emotions. You start measuring yourself by behavior. Did you show up? Did you try? Did you move forward? That's the scorecard. not how comfortable you felt. Modern culture has confused comfort with success. People want guarantees, certainty, safety, perfect timing, perfect conditions, perfect confidence. But perfect conditions never arrive, and while they're waiting, life keeps moving. Opportunities keep passing, years keep disappearing, potential keeps fading. Most people never realize this until it's too late. The biggest risk in life isn't failure. The biggest risk is hesitation. The graveyard of dreams isn't built from mistakes. It's built from delays, from one day, from maybe later, from I'll start when I'm ready. But readiness is a myth. Growth creates readiness, not the other way around. In my own reflection on this pattern, I've noticed something fascinating. Every major transformation begins before confidence appears. People become brave because they act. They don't act because they're brave. The action comes first. The identity follows. That's why small actions matter. One difficult phone call, one uncomfortable decision, one honest conversation, one risk, one step. Those tiny moments seem insignificant until years later, when you realize they changed everything. As the old saying goes, the man who moves a mountain begins by carrying away small stones. Confidence is built exactly that way. One stone at a time, one action at a time, one promise kept to yourself at a time. And eventually, something remarkable happens. You stop needing motivation. You stop needing encouragement. You stop needing proof. Because your actions have become evidence. Evidence that you can handle difficulty. Evidence that you can survive uncertainty. Evidence that you can trust yourself. And trust is the deepest form of confidence that exists. But we're approaching the final realization now. Because even action isn't the ultimate destination. There's one final transformation left, one final layer. The point where confidence evolves into something almost unshakable. The point where external events lose their power over your identity. The point where you stop surviving life and start standing above its chaos. And that's where we're going next. Into the final stage of becoming truly unshakable. There comes a moment in every person's life when they realize something no one prepared them for. The world never stops moving. People leave, plans fail, opinions change, opportunities come and go. Nothing stays still. And yet, most people spend their lives trying to build certainty inside an uncertain world. That's why they're exhausted. They're fighting reality itself. Think about it. You've spent years trying to control things that were never yours to control. Other people's opinions, other people's choices, other people's loyalty, other people's understanding. And every time reality refused to cooperate, you suffered. Not because life was unfair, because the expectation was impossible. But the real problem was never on the surface. The real problem was believing your identity depended on things outside your control. Because once your identity depends on external circumstances, you become fragile. Success becomes your identity. Failure becomes your identity. Approval becomes your identity. Rejection becomes your identity. And suddenly, your sense of self rises and falls with every event, like a ship being tossed around by waves. But there is another way to live, a quieter way, a stronger way, a way most people never discover. You stop building your identity on outcomes and start building it on principles. Not success, character. Not approval, integrity. Not attention, self-respect. When you sit alone with this thought, you realize something profound. Everything external can be taken from you. Money, status, recognition, relationships, titles. But character remains. And that's why the strongest people seem different. They're no longer negotiating with life. They've accepted reality. They've accepted uncertainty. They've accepted that pain is part of growth. Failure is part of growth. Loss is part of growth. And because they stopped resisting reality, they became stronger than it. Have you ever noticed this? The people who fear loss the most often lose themselves first. Because fear makes them cling. Fear makes them compromise. Fear makes them betray their own values. But those who accept loss become free. Free to act courageously. Free to speak honestly. Free to live authentically. And freedom creates power. The kind of power no one can give you and no one can take away. This is where the journey we've been on begins to connect. The reason you stop reacting to everything is because your peace matters more than your ego. The reason you master your emotions is because feelings are temporary, but decisions have consequences. The reason you stop seeking validation is because self-worth cannot be outsourced. The reason you build mental armor is because life will test everyone eventually. The reason you take action despite fear is because confidence follows movement. Every lesson points to the same destination: freedom. Not freedom from difficulty, freedom from being controlled by difficulty. And this is the realization most people never reach until it's too late. You don't become powerful by controlling the world. You become powerful by controlling yourself. The strongest person in the room is rarely the loudest. They're usually the calmest. The person who no longer needs to prove anything. The person who no longer needs to win every argument. The person who no longer needs everyone's approval. The person who can walk through chaos without becoming chaos. That's what it means to become unshakable. Not perfect, not fearless, not emotionless. Unshakable. Because storms will still come. Criticism will still come. Failure will still come. But they no longer determine who you are. And that's the difference between surviving life and mastering it. In my own reflection on these ideas, I've come to believe that confidence isn't really the goal. Peace is. Because the version of you that no longer reacts to everything, that no longer chases validation, that no longer fears uncertainty, isn't just more confident, it's more free. And freedom changes everything. So tonight, before you fall asleep, ask yourself one question. What would my life look like if I stopped giving away my power? Sit with that question. Don't rush the answer, because your future may depend on it. If this journey challenged the way you think, take a moment to support it. Like this video so these ideas can reach someone who needs them. Share it with a friend who is fighting battles no one can see. And if you're ready to keep exploring the deeper patterns that shape human behavior, purpose, discipline, confidence, and the hidden psychology of success, subscribe and continue the journey with Listen Beyond. Until next time, stay thoughtful, stay aware, and remember, the less the world controls your mind, the more your life becomes your own.